This podcast is rated S for spoilers. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Half Past Podcast. This is episode 94. The movie review is Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. The first of a series of makeup casts that we're going to do during this quarantine thing that's happening right now.
Awesome.
I'm Graham Ricks, and here with me is my friend and co-pilot, Ian Jones.
These are strange times.
Right?
You know, for dinner last night, I had a green salad and scrambled eggs.
Nice. that is a random dinner, sir.
But I can't. Well, my wife tried to recreate the Ronto wraps from Galaxy's Edge, and those are delicious.
Are they?
But it's not quite. I don't know. You got to go to Disneyland. Like every time you try to recreate Disney food, it's not the same.
Yeah.
I think they hold out on you on purpose. A magical ingredient. There's a reason why you're spending $15 on this, okay? Here's a punch in the face. Now eat your extra delicious churro.
Nice. The churros are so damn good.
They are. And it doesn't make any sense that it would be better than any other kind of churro.
Than any other kind of churro. Yes, right? But for some weird reason.
But, yep.
The ones at Disney are fantastic. Mm-hmm. They're very good. I don't know what it is.
Something about it. Magical Kingdom.
The Magical Kingdom. Who would have thought that this would turn into an advertisement for Disney? But
yeah, like they need more. Like that was the one thing. Like we were so, because I don't think I talked about this last time, but Annie and I we were able to get our honeymoon completed at Disney right before everything shut down.
Yes.
You know, and so that was really cool. But I'll tell you, I mean, the people who were going there did not care that this was happening. Disneyland coid be open today if they wanted to. They could be taken. They could say, "Hey, look, you got to wear masks. You got to have your temperature taken," and it would be packed. You would be, you know, everyone would be there trying to get early to get their boarding passes for Rise of the Resistance. It would still be the same thing, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure too. It's crazy. It's just crazy to think about. And I remember it was like the last time that Disneyland had been closed was back in like 9/11. So it's just like so bizarre that this is even a thing, you know. It's so crazy. So crazy. But we've all been doing this shelter-in-place thing. So basically what we decided to do is we're doing a series of makeup ones that we really wanted to record, but we just didn't get to them.
The movies that we always wanted to see and do, but for, you know, scheduling, summer trips.
Yep, so stuff like that is just like, so we didn't get, so one of the ones that we forgot to get to, or we couldn't get to, was Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse, which is why we're doing this one first. And the reason why we're doing this one first is because I saw this one way back when it first came out. I was a little bit late because it came out around Christmas, and I saw it in like February, and I was watching the movie, and I was like, man, it's a shame that we like can't get this done, because I can't remember what came up, but there was a reason why we couldn't get it done. I mean, it was around Christmas time, so that doesn't help either. But I think I might have been out of town or something that happened, so we couldn't quite get a hold of it. Or you might have been gone or something like that. But this one was one that I really wanted us to work on, because I thought that this one is right up our alley on a lot of different levels, you know?
For sure.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even seen it at all. So
yes,
I feel like, you know, now I feel like I've been missing out.
Yes, yes, you have.
Yeah.
When I brought Into the Spiderverse up to you a couple weeks ago about how we should probably start working on these like makeup casts, you said you wanted to go ahead and do Into the Spiderverse first, and I was telling you how have you not seen it? Because
right.
It's like really good. It's like a really good movie, and it's like so well done and so on and so forth. And so we're going to get really in depth into that when we get into the deep end of the podcast. But I just thought it was so funny that you had not seen this movie before. And the thing that's interesting about that is almost everyone I talked to unanimously wasn't crazy big on this movie before it came out. A lot of people were just like, I might see it. I don't know. And I don't know why that attitude was there, but I had that same attitude also. Because I was like, well, I want to see it at the very least because I thought the animation style was original and cool looking. And that was what I had my original reason for doing it was to watch that movie. And then everyone else was just kind of like, they had the same idea where they're just like, I might watch it, I might not. And then every person I've known that watched it were just like, you need to watch this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's and so it was definitely an interesting experience. So I just can't believe that you're one of the people that hadn't seen it.
Well, that's a good thing. And I do want to talk a little bit about it. So do you want to get right into it?
Yeah, we can get right into it. Let's just get right into it, and then I'll start with the synopsis, and then we'll go over the directors and the stars and everything, and then we'll just get right into rating this movie. So, synopsis of this one is Team Miles Morales becomes Spider-Man of his reality, crossing his path with 5 counterparts from other dimensions to stop a threat for all realities. This movie is directed by Bob Persichetti and Peter Ramsey, and we've talked about this numerous times before. I feel like I bring this up on so many different podcasts, especially the animation ones, where a lot of the times these guys that were like in-betweeners and storyboard artists like Bob Persichetti will eventually direct a movie. So this is the one that he received. He had help with Peter Ramsey from who also directed Rise of the Guardians. And it's really common. I don't know why this is, but it's really common amongst the animation community for this to happen. So he started out as just like an in-betweener, which is, if nobody knows what an in-betweener is, they're basically they're like what, a step up above the cleanup artist.
Right. I mean, there's the old school way of animating movies, doing it traditionally, is you have your sort of rock star animator.
Yes, the key
who comes
animators.
in and does just the keyframe drawings, the key drawings, and usually those aren't even complete. It's kind of like a half-assed job, but it's the blueprint for everything else. And then you start working your way down the food chain, where the really hard work in keeping lines consistent, scale, you follow that blueprint, but then a lot of drawing takes place, and where you put all your money in is really cleaning those up and making sure it's consistent. It was one of those things where I was surprised when we were learning traditional animation, just doing like a 2-second character reaction. It was incredibly difficult to do, to get clean and to look right
and consistent, clean lines.
It's astounding. So I mean, it's something that still to this day I have a lot of appreciation for. Those kind of guys, because I don't. It was so many long hours, and I think that we're spoiled in 3D. It would be nice to be able to say that we worked on a feature film. But it's staggering. And even with this one, even though it is in 3D and you don't have to worry about necessarily scale or the character looking different in one scene over the next. It's still, this is a lot of work, and like you were saying, it's animated in a little bit of a different way. So I'm hoping we can touch on that.
Oh, we'll definitely touch on that. And so this is where he started out as. So he was the guy who basically, between the keyframes that the key animator did, he just like would do all the frames in between. Because if you're doing something at like 24 frames per second, that's 24 drawings per second of film. And the keyframe animator will probably do like, what? Maybe 4 of those drawings, depending on the animation.
It's not much at all.
It's not much. No, it's not much at all. He like does the real like prominent pieces, and then the in-betweener is the one that does everything in between, which is why they got the name for it. And so it was like, really, it's interesting that this is where this guy started, and it's just interesting to see now that he's directing this movie. This movie is starring Shameik Moore as Miles Morales. He is from The Get Down, but he's mainly like a music artist. He's like a rapper and a singer and a producer, and so that's what he does for the most part. So he's really not crazy well known as an actor. Jake Johnson as Peter B. Parker, who was of course in New Girl, and he was also in Jurassic World. Hailee Steinfeld as Gwen Stacy, and she was in True Grit and Ender's Game. Mahershala Ali as Uncle Aaron, who has been having such an amazing career in the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
He's really been coming up. He's another one of those actors where I believe his biggest role started on 4400, but he was also on House of Cards, and then he was in Hunger Games, and then he's now has an Academy Award with Green Book, and he's starting to come up. And when they hired him, when they announced that they were putting him as Blade, that's going to be coming out who knows when at this point in time. But when him as Blade, I think will be freaking amazing. Mahershala Ali is just I think he's just a really good actor. And I think he has quite the presence on screen every time he's there. And I think it even shows through in this movie, too. Brian Tyree Henry as Jefferson Davis. He was in Windows and If Beale Street Could Talk. We have Lily Tomlin, who's mainly she's done stage, and she's stand-up comedian.
The great Lily Tomlin.
Yes, the great Lily Tomlin. She's been around for a while. She's also in Grace and Frankie and I Heart Huckabees, and she's been around for a long time, and she's also very talented. John Mulaney as Spider-Ham, who was in his own show, Mulaney and Big Mouth. We have Kimiko Glenn as Penny Parker, who was in Orange is the New Black. She was the one who played So-So. She was also in Waitress, which is a very good stage musical, because I've been watching so many musicals with Jackie. So
Ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
I'd slap you through the internet if I could.
Nice.
There's only one musical to watch, and that's Phantom of the Opera.
Real nice. Oh my gosh.
It's true.
Oh man, so many things I want to say right now, but we don't have time.
All right, whatever.
She was also on.
Just take it on the chin and let's move on.
Yes, she's also on DuckTales. And here we are with Nicolas Cage. I got a long list here because there's so many characters.
Wow.
But here we are with Nicolas Cage. And man, Nicolas Cage, I always want to talk about Nicolas Cage every time he comes up in the podcast, because somehow we haven't done very many, any movies with him in it. You know? It's I don't know how this has worked out, but it's because his career has just been
it's been in free fall for a while.
Oh yeah.
I think this might be the only movie we've discussed that actually has had Nicolas Cage in it.
Yes.
In 90 plus episodes.
Oh yeah. Yes. It's
That's
so crazy to see somebody like Nicolas Cage, who we grew up during the 90s, who was a major star. He was a huge star in the 90s. He was one of those actors that was back then, he was that the one they usually say where it's $20 million a movie type of thing. He was one of those guys where no matter what he was in a movie, he was getting paid to be there for sure. And for some weird reason, it just went into free fall, and then he got involved with tax problems. And so since then, he's just been taking whatever role he can, which is mainly just a bunch of straight to DVD movies to pay back debt. He's been doing that for years now. It's so crazy. And so this is the first time that we've actually talked to him or talked about him in any of these things. And sure enough, this is actually a pretty good movie. And I think Nicolas Cage, for the most part, is really good lately when he's doing a voice role. It seems like that's when he's at his best. It's like so weird. Kathryn Hahn is Doc Ock. She was in Crossing Jordan, How to Lose Your Guy in 10 Days. Liev Schreiber is in this movie too as Wilson Fisk. He plays Kingpin.
Sounds about right.
And, right. Liev Schreiber is another one of those guys who, he's an actor who's oddly enough been in a lot of different comic book movies, including this one, but he also was at that really rough X-Men Origins Wolverine movie, which was easily one of the worst comic book movies I've ever seen. It's bad. It's really, really bad. And then we have Chris Pine as Peter Parker, who of course is in Star Trek and in Wonder Woman. And so those are all the stars. That's that sort of ensemble cast because of all these characters. Now let's go ahead and get into the quirks and likes section, Jones. Let's really start talking about this,
okay,
all right? So, I watched this movie the first, February when it came out, like I said earlier. It came out in December, and I saw it 2 months later. And what ended up happening when I left that movie theater, I was thinking to myself, because I knew we weren't going to record this one because there was just a scheduling issue. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, what would I say to Ian about what is wrong with this movie? And I absolutely had a really hard time coming up with something because it is so well done. Now, with that said, the only thing I could come up with, I remember at the time, was the almost ridiculous size of Kingpin, who's... He's like, the thing about Kingpin is always drawn very large. He's a large man. He's the size of like a refrigerator. And he's like that all the time. And when he's drawn in comic books, he's huge.
Yes.
But in this one specifically, he is gigantic. And I'm trying to figure out, there's scenes with him walking, where he is exiting a car, but it's from a different shot.
But they never show him
leaving
a car or going through a regular door.
Or going through a door. they definitely have scenes where he's the car door is open and he's walking away, and then they have scenes where he walks through a door, but it's clearly at an angle where you can't tell the size of the door. And a lot of that keeps happening throughout this movie. And I remember it's kind of when he's fighting Spider-Man at the end of the movie inside the train car. You have no idea how he got in the train.
Right, yeah, he's just inside the train.
Yeah, he's just inside the train. He's huge. And I remember I was just man, when I left the movie theater, I was I don't know if I like that or not. I don't know if I like the size of Kingpin, even though he's always a large character. It's just how he's always portrayed, because he's 400 pounds of muscle. That's how he's described in the comic books. And so he's a huge dude. So with all that said, when I watched it the second time, I was explicitly more okay with it. I couldn't. It's just I watched the movie again. I just watched this last night, and just to kind of refresh my memory. And I remember, and I was just totally okay with it. But I thought it's so interesting when you have these little scenes where he's just inside of a room. So all the little issues you would have going through doors, they just conveniently don't have it in there, which is so hilarious. The only other quirk I have, Jones, on this movie, and I have a ton of likes, so we're gonna have a long conversation about that, but
okay.
In terms of the only thing I have left is, oddly enough, a true quirk, and that's the animation. The animation is brilliant, obviously. It's really great. And I think the style is great, and I think the way they do it is just brilliant. And the little tricks that they do is awesome. The problem I have with the animation is it absolutely, and it happened again, because when I went to the theater, I had to get used to it. And then when I saw it yesterday at home, I also had to get used to it. And so once you like overcome, it's a very jarring style to look at first, but once you kind of get over it, you like love it. And that's why it's like a really true quirk. The only other thing I have to say about this animation, along with what I just said, was basically, I absolutely think that this animation suffers on the smaller screen. I absolutely think it does. Because when I watched it last night on my TV at home, it is not nearly as gorgeous looking as it was in theaters. And it really makes me upset that you didn't get to see this in theaters, because it is brilliant. Like, you get to see a lot more of the detail that you don't quite get to see as much on the smaller screen. It's like how they use those, like, you know, the comic book dots.
Yeah, the like, halftones. The
halftones that are done. It's really way more striking when you watch it on a big screen. It's so much better. And so I remember when I watched it last night, I was thinking to myself, this absolutely suffers. It does not look as good as what I remembered it to look like, because it was just so freaking gorgeous on the big screen. And those are my quirks, man. So what do you got?
You know, the one thing that kind of bothered me, and it's ultimately a really good thing about it needs to happen for Miles to become Spider-Man in his own universe, was the death of Peter Parker, and that's a really upsetting thing to see, especially at the hands of Kingpin. Like, you would think it can't be him. When did Kingpin get all these superpowers? But really, by the end of the movie, you know, it was a fight that I really wanted to see. You know, because I think that the point is not that the original Spider-Man dies, and if we're taking the intro at face value, that's really the death of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, which is something that's a little jarring to see. So I had a little issue with that, but I understood why it had to happen. My quirks are really little kind of nitpicky things. Like I thought it was weird that his uncle, who it's revealed is the Prowler, I thought it was really weird that he took his nephew to such a dangerous area. Like he says, I found this working on an engineering job, which is really vague, but essentially he's taking his nephew to a spot to lay down, some graffiti art that's right where they're building this super collider. So I'm just like, what does he think? Like, I understand that, again, that's one of those things that needs to happen.
Yes.
They don't ever explain why the spider's there, other than the spider is an alchemy spider. And there were, in other Spider-Man movies, a lot of other spiders that got loose. And that's sort of, between the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield ones, that's sort of one of those unresolved things that never gets talked about, is that there were other spiders that got loose. So I was just kind of like, God, it's a little weird that he would take him there, knowing that his nephew might return without him to such a dangerous area. So, I mean, that aside, and like one little thing which I think makes a lot of sense, but you would just never see in an actual Spider-Man movie. But like seeing all the different Spider-Men getting off a bus and then using their web shooters to travel, like, okay, that makes a lot of sense in New York. But I couldn't imagine like just sitting on a bus and looking over and seeing 4 or 5 Spider-Men. Like all decked out in costume, who are just like, no, we're going to save the day, but we're taking public transportation because it's the green thing to do.
Yeah.
And it makes sense if you have web shooters and a limited supply of webbing,
Yes.
But it's like a little detail that you never expect to see. That I guess people in New York are just like, yeah, it happens.
Well, it's so funny because there's so many things in this movie that, like, I think is just hilarious. And that's one of the scenes where they have this ridiculous, when he first meets up with Peter B. Parker, and you have this ridiculous scene of him trying to, like, save him. But he doesn't know what to do. And so they go through New York and all this stuff, and they eventually land right in the middle of a crosswalk. And he's just like, just go around.
Right. And everyone does. No one bothers helping either of them up.
No, they just kind of walk over him and just want to, like, it's just no care at all. And he's just like, thanks, New York. And so I think stuff like that is, like, just kind of a funny thing because just, like, New York is such a prominent city in the U.S. and there's so many people and there's so many weird freaking characters in New York that, like, you probably would just be like, whatever. Like, it's not.
Only in New York, right?
Yeah, only in New York. And you just, like, don't even acknowledge the fact that there's, like, all these different people in Spider-Man costumes around you.
So, my last thing, which isn't really a unique. It isn't at all related to the film, but it has to do with more of the genesis around Miles Morales as a whole in the comic books. Like, I understand the need to try to give him some things that are unique.
Yeah.
My argument would be that if you're going to give him 2 new abilities, which I think is a good thing to establish himself as, you know, this is one version of Spider-Man that they were pushing really hard during the, you know, over the past few years. I think that's fine. But you need to remove 2 abilities. So that's one of those things where I just feel like there needs to be, you know, some balance there. And I don't know what else you alter, but I think that makes a whole lot of sense in terms of, okay, he's maybe not going to have the Spidey sense at all. And his is actually... His is a nerfed version, according to everything I've read. I haven't read much of the Ultimate Spider-Man or you know, any of the ones really with Miles Morales. I guess that was the one trade-off is his Spidey sense isn't as strong as Peter's, but it's still there. It's still present. And I think that's probably that's essential for Spider-Man to have. I'm just...
Yeah.
I guess I'm making the argument that if you're going to do that, there needs to be a drawback to it.
I can see that because you're almost saying that it's Spider-Man's. You're adding powers, but not removing them. So Spider-Man's almost getting like too powerful.
Right. Yeah.
Is what so he's like almost more powerful than some of the other Spider-Man.
Yes. Yeah.
So I get what you're saying. And it's funny that you mentioned the Spidey sense because obviously that's not brought up at all, that it's weaker. But one of the scenes that I noticed the second time around I watched was when you had Peter Parker, so you had Peter B. Parker, you had Miles Morales, and then you had Spider-Gwen. So you had Gwen Stacy, and they were all in the Collider, and they're all fighting, they're all next to each other. And the Spidey sense happens, because Spidey sense is happening throughout this entire movie, and they all have it, and it's even the thing that connects all of them. They're just like, whoa, you're like me, which I thought was just like a cool thing to put in this movie. But that scene specifically, I thought was really interesting that I noticed it this time around is when the Spidey sense goes off, because they're all being attacked at the same time. But if you look at it, Miles Morales is last to turn around. He absolutely, Peter B. Parker's first. He looks immediately. And then you have Gwen Stacy's next, and then Miles Morales is just a little too late. Like it's like this extra subtle thing that they added to where it's almost as if he's not as in tune with his Spidey sense as everyone else is. Even though at this point in time he is Spider-Man. Yeah. Like he's he's overcame everything. So I thought that was such a really cool feature in there. And I noticed a lot of that in this movie the second time around I watched it. There's all these little subtle things where he's like a little slower, or like a little, than some of the others. And I thought it was so cool that they tossed that in there. What else do you got?
So the very last thing, these are all sort of nitpicky things, but it's one of those things where when I went back to watch it a second time, I finally got why they did it, but I didn't understand why they had Gwen lie about her name when she was from an alternate dimension. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, wait a minute, there's probably 2 Gwen Stacys. And so she didn't want to do that. But I also thought that, she might be more intuitive than any of them, because she essentially followed her instincts to enroll in school, to get this job, to get closer to him. So obviously that she's Gwen Stacy. Before she ever says anything, she's the one blonde that you see in the school. Yeah. It's definitely got to be her. Yeah. So I thought it was a little weird, but then I came back around to it. Like, well, arguably there are 2 Gwen Stacys, and one of them is much older. In this one would be in like her mid-20s. Yeah. If Spider-Man was like 26 when he passed away, there's probably another Gwen Stacy in this universe.
Yeah. And there's actually a lot of weird things with Gwen Stacy, because it's like everything you said, it's brought up multiple times over, and with Gwen Stacy, because even like you bringing up the age, it's specifically told that she's 15 months older than Miles, which you think she'd be even older, but then that could be another Gwen Stacy. Like, you just don't, like, it's a really confusing little thing. And I remember when I watched it the second time, I also was curious how Gwen Stacy got to where she was, because she took her instincts to enroll, right? Well, he talks with Gwen Stacy before the collider goes through, because he sees her that first day when he goes back. And he interacts with her again after the collider. So I always thought it was strange that the timing was weird too, because it almost seemed like Gwen Stacy was there, at least Spider-Gwen version was there, before the collider even was engaged.
No. Right? Yeah, well, no. The thing is, they all came over during different bursts. Yes. So they had been there, and I think they were all finally there to witness the headline that Spider-Man had been killed, and that
yes.
But there were other Spider-Man.
But the timing, yes. But this is the problem when you start getting these parallel universes, because the timing is different for each one. It's like really weird how it switches over between, depending on which one it was. And so you got it, like, for me, that was like a little bit confusing, especially the second time I watched it, when I was like looking at it more critically, and I was just like, this is weird, why is this here? So it's one of those things that I just had noticed that it's confusing.
Gotcha. Really that's it for me as far as works go.
Cool. Well, let's get into the likes, man. Yes. So I got a ton of likes in this movie, and the first thing I think we have to absolutely talk about is the animation style is so cool. They did such a good job of making a 3D animated movie. And they basically went over everything again in 2D to, like, give it this hand-drawn look. And I think that's just, like, so cool. And it's something that I always thought was a very interesting way to do something. And I remember when we were in college, I was always wondering, because there's specific things that were coming out back when we were in college. Like, you had that really weird, the Scanner Darkly. You remember that freaking movie? When you start having, like, live action with 2D on top, and when you start having things like that, it looks kind of awkward and doesn't quite work. And with more realistic looking traditional animation, I always wondered how it would look if you did a 3D character and did 2D over it. And, like, this does it, and I think it does it well, and it looks like a living comic book. It's really cool. It's really, really cool.
There's something else too, which I think is fantastic about it, because you were mentioning how long, like, it takes a second to get acclimated. And the first time I watched it, I thought it was great that right away they had a scene where Miles is just in the car with his dad, and it's a slower paced scene, and I felt like that's where I settled in, and so that was a really smart idea. But
I agree.
But one of the things that I loved is that when Miles finally figures it out, when he's finally able to calm down and use his powers when he needs to, and essentially it starts that "What's Up, Danger" animated sequence. There's smoother animation.
Oh yeah.
For Miles and everything around him, like as soon as he's like, and as soon as he goes to see Aunt May, and he gets his own Spidey costume and dresses it to sort of match his style and everything. That whole animated sequence has a smoother feel to it, and I thought that was really interesting, because when things are really hectic with him, when he's panicking, that's when it starts getting, a little rougher around the edges, a little, a few more frames missing in between.
Oh yeah, which they absolutely did on purpose.
Yes, yeah, and so I thought that was a great touch.
Oh yeah, and that scene, the "What's Up, Danger" sequence, like you said, with it being, everything is not just smooth, everything is almost like liquid. It's like fluid. It's like everything runs like water through that whole scene. It's like he's so calm and connected that everything around him is simple and easy, and it's so cool. It's like, and there's so much of that in this movie, where they use the animation style and the feel to the advantage as a part of the story of him going from where he begins into where he ends up. And that's like rare. You don't see that happen a lot in a lot of these comic movies. Because, I mean, let's face it. I mean, it's the story of the hero. Like, it's not... These stories are all essentially the same.
Right.
Yeah. With all these origin stories of these characters. But the thing that's really cool about this one is they bring all of that in with how it goes with the actual style, and it's like so cool. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. It's the reason why I thought Black Panther was so good too, because Black Panther, again, it's kind of an origin story. He kind of like tells a story, and then you get his background with his connection to his father and everything. But then the thing that makes that story different from others is that there's so much more of a risk, because it's an entire country that's involved, and there's secrecy involved, and there's his father that's involved, that's also having struggle and terror. And then it, like, the way it forms itself, and the fact that he's no longer, like, he finally accepts that he's not his father, he's something else. And like, that's the kind of the stuff like that makes these stories different than all the other ones, which, let's face it, are all the same story. So it's like, to have something like this happen is just amazing how they do it in this one. It's so cool.
And so just for anyone listening, like, when you call them out for all being the same story, you look at Black Panther, you look at Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel. They're essentially the same stories. The window dressing is different, but you start looking thematically at what's there and what happens throughout the course of the movie. Like, there's a formula. The reason why it's being, I don't want to say parodied, but it's successful. It works for those characters, but I think that there were elements to this one that really stood out. That this was an amazing way to do an origin story. And I'll tell you something else. Marvel because this was all Sony, and
Yes.
I think, was it Phil Lord who wrote this movie?
Yes, it was Phil Lord.
Okay, so Disney and Marvel need to really look at this, because I think this is the blueprint for making the Fantastic Four work.
Nice.
So, they really need to look at this, because there were things that this movie that Sony did got absolutely right about comic book movies that have been missing in 20-something movies of the MCU. I don't know, is it 26 films or something?
It's a lot of
Yeah, there are things they have not gotten right about comic books that this movie gets right. So
yep, 100%. It gets everything correct. It's the reason why this whole time I've just been shocked that you hadn't watched this movie.
I know,
it's so good. It's everything about this movie. Even just the beginning of him humming a tune to the song and kind of being awkward and everything, and then that scene is important. It happens later on where he's like, well, how do you relax? And he starts humming the song. It's a funny scene, but it shows you again how this is another one of those movies which are very few movies where there are no wasted scenes. Everything is important. Everything that happens is important later on. And this doesn't happen very often in movies. There's usually one of the critiques that we have in a lot of movies is why is this scene in here? Right, it's it doesn't progress the story. It's just a throwaway scene. Why is it in here? This movie doesn't have any of that. All of it is completely important. And I think that's just so cool. And even just having him, even the experience of his progress of his teacher realizing she's 0 out of 100, and she's just the only way, if you have a true and false and you completely guess, what are the chances? What's your percentage? She's like 50%. And she's like, okay, so the only way for you to get 0, because random chance you should get more than 0. Right, the only way you can do it is if you know
what
all
the
answers.
Is,
you know what the answers are. Right. And you put in the wrong thing.
C for all of them, right?
Yes, you would have higher than a 0. And so, having that scene in there, and then her telling him, look, I want you to write an essay. And he talks about Great Expectations, which comes up multiple times in this movie. Great Expectations shows up first when he's going through all the classes, and they have all the montage of him trying to do school, and he talks about Great Expectations, and then his other teacher he has the book, and next to it, and she goes, write a book about this. And then after that, while he's struggling with himself, he does this graffiti thing that says no expectations. But then after that, he realizes that there's a progress through that. So even this comes back up. So even this no expectations comes up again later in the movie, where he actually has the expectations, and that is important. And so everything with this, and including the message that's with that, is so good, because the overall message of this film is definitely reiterated at the end. They kind of hit you over the head with it just a little bit at the end, where he goes, anybody can wear the mask. It doesn't matter. Everything else doesn't matter. It's what matters is how you feel about yourself. And that's so cool. And that's one of those things that throughout the whole movie that's also brought up, because there's a lot of people wearing Spider-Man masks and costumes because New York's dealing with the death of Peter Parker. So they're all wearing masks, and even just having this weird scene with Stan Lee where he's just don't worry, it always fits eventually. Even that's an important line. Right. It's supposed to be a throwaway line, but actually it isn't. It's important that everyone can do this. You just need to believe in yourself, and it's such a great message. I just can't. It's
I'll tell you, just a real little thing, because this could have been a quirk, but you just reminded me of this, because he is a kid, right?
Yeah, he's a child,
a high school kid. There's a scene where he and Peter B. Parker are getting a burger and the check comes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think they actually paid for that meal, or did they have to, like, run the hell out of there?
It's funny you say that, because when I watched that scene, I'm like, nobody paid for that.
Right, yeah, there's no way. 2 burgers. there's
no way.
A high school kid had enough money on him.
No. It's like, it's just like so funny, that scene. Do you have money? And it just cuts.
Right, yeah.
So,
you don't need to see it, but it is a really interesting one of those moments.
Yep. There's a lot of scenes like that in this movie. I mean, there's a lot of funny things in this movie, which is also what's so great. I think the humor is really good. Like, I feel like a scene like that is hilarious. I love how he's like, it's exactly a thing you would expect Peter B. Parker to do, because he's like a down and out Spider-Man. And so one of the first things he does is he gets something to eat, and he specifically finds one that's a place that he loves that was closed in his dimension. It's exactly what you'd expect him to do. No, this place closed like 6 years ago. You don't understand. And it's just like such a funny thing. It's just so good. And the only other thing I could say, just to tag on to what I was talking about earlier about the message, is I really enjoy the sense of like the importance of family in it too. Because you get 2 scenes with his father that's important. You get the scene at the beginning that you referred to where he's talking to his dad. And then you get the second scene where his dad comes to his room and he's like tied up after this like really awful experience where he's pretty much at his lowest possible point in this movie. And then you have his father talk to him that kind of lifts him up just a little bit, enough for him to overcome like this mental issue that he's been having. And then that's when you get the what's up danger scene after that.
Yeah.
And I think that's like having that in there and having his uncle be a part of it and have this aspect of family, and have his uncle, the last thing he says before he dies is, "You're the best of us, Miles. Just keep going." So it's like everyone around him believes in him, but he doesn't believe in himself. And so that's all he needs. And so then he gets the what's up danger scene, and you're just like, it's just all of that in this movie. It's all of this is a part of the storyline that's twisted together to build up Miles and to build up everybody. And it's just like so cool. It's so well done, man. And that's all I got, man.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of great scenes, and probably too many to to point out, but there were certain things that I just loved, like when Miles gets bit by the spider, there's sort of a casual clap on his hands, like he's not worried at all about it. And, but the audience knows exactly what that means.
Oh yeah, right.
I really loved that they're walking and running on walls and having conversations like it's nothing.
Yes. Great. So cool. Yeah. I love that too.
One of the things that I had mentioned earlier, it makes sense to me that there are comic books and merchandising that are being mentioned in a superhero movie. That makes a lot of sense to me, and it's something that the MCU has never figured out, and that's always driven me up a wall. There needs to be references to actual comic books that were the genesis of these characters, and then in the movie they're inspiring these other adventures. It has to eventually be mentioned. The closest that the MCU ever got to it was mentioning Captain America trading cards. And so
the only other time that comic books are mentioned is not a part of the MCU, and that's in Logan. That's specifically done in Logan.
Right. And Logan, probably arguably the best of all of those Fox films.
Yeah, X-Men films.
And
Logan's
really
brilliant.
It's not even an X-Men film. It's It's Old Man Wolverine. It's like a graphic novel. It's something else.
Yep.
I love the scene where they're working together where they're spying at that, is it alchemy or
yes,
the name of that kind of, like, I love when they're in the air ducts and Spider-Man's just like, now he's gonna say you have 24 hours. I love how he's just making fun of the bad guys. It's just those little moments of where you get to see Spider-Man's
when you get to see Spider-Man, because
you get to see them, like,
that is absolutely Spider-Man. Yeah, and it's funny you even mentioned that, because see, now I think of another scene that I love, because that same sequence, the way that ends is them coming, is essentially where you get Kingpin's motivation, and it's done with the flashback, but it's so effective. It's so effective. So you have him sitting there, he always is clicking this pen, the whole time, and he keeps clicking that pen, and then you get the scene when they're doing the air ducts and while Doc Ock is chasing them around or whatever. On her way back, you get a scene with Kingpin waiting for her to get back, and he's clicking the pen and clicking the pen and clicking the pen, and then you get the flashback of what happened and the reason why you get Kingpin's motivation, which Kingpin's motivation for most of that character has always been, like, he's basically just a mob boss. But the thing that's almost always been a part of his character is even though he's a ruthless mob boss, and a businessman, he has a soft spot for his family. It's the only thing he has a soft spot for, is his wife and his kid. And it's like, and to have this in there with just one flashback, that's it. There's one flashback where he's beating the hell out of Spider-Man, and his family notices what happens, and they run away and end up dying in the process. They get into a car wreck. And that's all that's in there. It's like, what, 5 minutes of film, maybe? I don't even think it's that much. It's probably like 2 minutes of film. Like, it's not much, yet it's so effective to know his motivation immediately, and how that he cares a lot about that. And it's the reason why he's creating the Collider, is so that he can get an alternate dimension to get his family back. And that's so simple. And the fact that scene also gets paralleled again when he's beating up on Miles Morales is just also, like, again, no wasted scenes. I mean, it's just, this movie's just well thought out, well done, man. It's good. So good.
Let's see. I think that's, so the last thing that I felt they just did a superb job on, and chalk it up to editing and sound design, but the music is incredible. I love all the songs that they chose. When they use them, it's perfect, because it's tailored. Like, it feels like Spider-Man, but it also feels like Miles Morales, and I think that those are two. I mean, he for a new generation of comic book readers, he is Spider-Man, right? That's like a tough thing for guys like me to say, but then when I see this, like, this makes me want to go and check out, like, legitimately, this makes me want to order Miles Morales comic books and check them out for sure. Because this is so incredible, and the way that this was done, it's like, you know what, it is a really good point. I would love to see a Gwen Stacy movie.
Oh, Spider-Gwen?
I mean, totally, she by far has the coolest costume out of any of them, I think.
Yeah, her costume's awesome. Oh yeah, her costume's awesome.
So I think that would be really fun to see, to see either in animated form or whatever, but like this.
Well, we'll have to see.
Yeah, this was so well done, and I'll end with this. This is the first time in a very long time where I watched a movie and then immediately gone back to see it. Like, had I saw this in theaters, I would have turned around and gone into a second showing. I'm sure of it, because exactly what I did on my little computer monitor. I was like, oh my god. Okay, let's watch it again.
Yeah, it's the movie's damn near perfect, man. It is a brilliant movie, man, and I am so excited because I know for a fact that this is getting a sequel. I think it's supposed to be released in 2022 or something like that.
No, that's gonna
but there's
get
also
pushed a little, but
yeah, we'll see what happens. There's also rumors that there should be a spinoff happening also, so you might get a Spider-Gwen movie. I don't know. You definitely can do movies with these characters, especially the Gwen Stacy one. I think it's just like really cool, and it's so good. So obviously, just go ahead and rate this thing. I mean, I think this is one of the best animated movies ever.
Yes.
And not only is it one of the best animated movies ever, it's one of the best comic book movies ever. And that is really freaking impressive considering how much we've seen. And even though I've seen more comic book movies that are really good since this movie, and I still say this is easily one of the best ones out of all of them, and it's one of the best animated movies, and it absolutely deserved the Academy Award for Best Animated Picture. There's no way. It's so good. It's perfect. It's damn near perfect. The movie's great, so I obviously say see it, buy it, and I own it. So
nice. Well, yeah, check it. It's on Netflix now. It is worth the watch. It's got, so much heart. It's, I think, really. I think it's the perfect way to introduce this character, and I think it's a really good model moving forward for comic book movies. To where we've been treated to some really interesting ones, but I think this one like checks all the boxes for me.
Oh yeah,
and I do think it's right up there. Like if I had to do a top 5 for animated films, I don't see how this isn't close to number 1. So I want to do that with you sometime. Yeah. Really think,
oh gosh, that would be hard.
Really think about it and do our top 5. Do like a half an hour podcast. Do like just a show. Do an H2P special. Our top 5, here's why.
That would be so hard.
Something to think about.
But we can give it a try.
So,
yeah, something to think
about. See it, buy it.
Yep, great. Amazing movie. Alright, let's sign out. If anyone wants to contact us, we have our home on the web at halfpastpodcast.com.
Like us on Facebook.
We're on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify.
We're on Stitcher, Libsyn, and TuneIn.
And we always have our email at halfpastcast@gmail.com. That's halfpastcast@gmail.com.
Tweet us at halfpastpodcast. Graham's always checking that Twitter feed.
Oh, yeah. I don't even know the last time I checked that Twitter feed.
So, I don't really do social media anymore, but...
Yeah, what? Neither do I. And so that's why it's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Easily the best thing is probably email or Facebook.
Maybe we need to amend this. Look, it's Facebook and email, that's it. But I haven't memorized. I don't even have the outline open, so...
Nice. I like to thank everybody for listening and thank everybody for your support and joining us on this first of a series of makeup podcast that we're gonna do. So I am not entirely sure what the next one's gonna be. Holy crap. Let me look.
What is the next one? I think I said no particular order, right? I agree.
You definitely said no particular
7
order.
movies.
Yeah, okay, so we have The Predator, Aladdin, Mowgli, Moana, Venom, Ready or Not, and Knives Out. So.
Okay.
It's gonna be one of those.
Oh boy.
This is the Half Past Podcast. I'm Graham Ricks.
Jonesy.
See you next flick.